Living in Maple Grove Estates had always been a dream for me. The tree-lined streets, the well-kept lawns, and the sense of community made it feel like the perfect place to settle down. For 3 years, life here was peaceful. Sure, the Homeowners Association, HOA, could be a bit overbearing at times, like when they fined Mrs. Thompson for having her Christmas lights up until January 10th. But overall, it was a small price to pay for living in such a beautiful neighborhood. That all changed when Margaret Hastings decided to run for HOA president. Margaret was the kind of person who could make you feel like you were back in high school, and she was the queen bee. She had that perfectly coiffed blonde hair, always wore designer athleisure wear, and carried herself with an air of superiority that could make even the most confident person feel small. When she started campaigning door-to-door 6 months ago, armed with a binder full of community improvement proposals, I should have known trouble was brewing. Her campaign slogan was, "Restoring Maple Grove to its former glory." At the community meeting where she announced her candidacy, she made it clear that she believed some residents were letting standards slip. "We need to maintain our property values," she declared, her gaze lingering on my house with its newly installed solar panels. I knew right then and there that I was in her crosshairs. The solar panels had been a significant investment, but they were already paying off. My energy bills had dropped by nearly 40%, and I felt good about reducing my carbon footprint. I'd gone through all the proper channels, getting permits and HOA approvals before installation, so I wasn't worried when Margaret won the election by promising to modernize our community guidelines. But then the violation notice appeared on my front door. The violation notice. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I found the letter taped to my door. The official HOA letterhead made it look even more menacing. "Dear resident," it began. "It has come to our attention that your unauthorized solar installation violates our new architectural guidelines. You have 72 hours to remove these unsightly additions or face daily fines." I was furious. I'd done everything by the book. I tried calling the HOA office, but Margaret's new assistant, a timid woman named Linda, informed me that the president was too busy to discuss individual violations. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. That evening, I stood on Margaret's pristine porch, clutching my folder of approval documents. When she opened the door, her expression was one of thinly veiled disdain. "Oh, it's you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I suppose you're here about the violation notice." "Yes, Margaret," I said, holding up the folder. "I have all the documentation showing these panels were properly approved before installation. They're completely legal." She waved her hand dismissively. "Those approvals were granted under the old board. Our new guidelines clearly state that visible solar installations detract from community aesthetics. Surely you understand we need to maintain our property values." "The panels are staying," I said firmly. "They were legally approved, and you can't retroactively deny permission. If you persist with these fines, I'll have no choice but to challenge them legally." Her eyes narrowed. "Well, if that's your attitude, I suppose we'll have to handle this officially. Don't say I didn't try to be reasonable." With that, she shut the door in my face. The power outage. I spent the next few days documenting everything and consulting with a lawyer friend who confirmed that Margaret's attempts to force the removal of my panels wouldn't hold up in court. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The first power outage happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home when the lights flickered and then went out completely. At first, I thought it was just a random fluctuation, but when I went outside to check my electrical panel, I found something that made my blood boil. The lines connecting my solar system to the power grid had been deliberately cut. As I stood there, staring at the cleanly severed cables, my neighbor Tom came running over. "Hey, is your power out too?" The whole street just went dark. That's when it hit me. My solar setup was connected to the neighborhood grid through a sophisticated net metering system. By cutting my lines, Margaret hadn't just disabled my panels, she created a surge that knocked out power to the entire block. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't help but smile slightly. Margaret had just made a massive mistake, and the best part was, I had security cameras that had caught the whole thing. The investigation. The responding police officers were immediately concerned. Tampering with electrical infrastructure wasn't just vandalism. It was a public safety issue. Officer Martinez spent over an hour taking statements and photographs, paying particular attention to my security footage, which clearly showed Margaret approaching my electrical panel with industrial wire cutters. "This is serious," Officer Martinez said. "She could be facing charges far beyond vandalism. This could have caused fires or other hazards." As utility trucks arrived to restore power, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Margaret was notably absent, but I could see her silhouette pacing behind her living room curtains. The first battle had been fought, but the war was far from over. The fallout. The next morning, I walked into the police station to meet with Detective Chun, a no-nonsense woman who had been assigned to the case. She had already reviewed my security footage and gathered statements from the utility company. "Mrs. Hastings' actions didn't just affect your home," Detective Chun explained. "She created a cascade failure that impacted critical infrastructure for the entire subdivision." I handed her a folder of statements from 23 neighbors. Mrs. Peterson across the street had to throw out everything in her refrigerator. The Jacobsons lost their entire fish tank when the pumps failed. The Smiths' basement flooded because their sump pump stopped working. Detective Chin's eyebrows rose as she flipped through the papers. "This is very thorough. We're also concerned because there's a resident on your street who relies on powered medical equipment. Fortunately, their backup generator kicked in, but this could have been much worse." Just then, her phone buzzed. After a brief conversation, she looked up with a satisfied expression. "Mrs. Hastings is being brought in for questioning now. Given the evidence and potential charges, her lawyer has advised her to cooperate fully." As if on cue, I heard Margaret's voice echoing down the hallway. "This is ridiculous. I was simply enforcing HOA guidelines. That person was clearly in violation." "Mrs. Hastings," a male voice interrupted firmly, "I strongly advise you to stop talking until we're in the interview room." I couldn't help but smile as I heard Margaret's heels clicking away. Detective Chin caught my expression and allowed herself a small smile as well. "This is far from over," she said. "But I have to say, I've never seen someone so thoroughly document their own criminal activity before." The community revolt. While Margaret was being questioned, her actions had set off a chain reaction in the community. The power outage had forced many neighbors to miss work or lose valuable equipment, and they weren't happy. As news spread about the cause, people began digging into other recent HOA decisions. What they found was shocking. Margaret had been forced to resign from another HOA board 3 years ago after attempting to implement similarly aggressive policies. She'd conveniently left that detail off her campaign materials. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was packed. Residents were furious, and the atmosphere was electric. Margaret sat at the front, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Neighbors detailed thousands of dollars in damages. The resident with medical equipment spoke about their terror when the power failed. Environmental experts explained how Margaret's actions had not only been illegal, but had actually cost the community money by disrupting our solar contribution to the grid. Margaret's attempts to defend herself only made things worse. "I was just trying to maintain our community standards," she protested. "An eyesore that saved us money." Mr. Johnson, our resident accountant, interrupted. "I've reviewed the numbers. That solar setup helped reduce our community's overall utility costs. By damaging it, you actually decreased our property values." The final blow came when our HOA's insurance company representative took the floor. "Due to the intentional nature of Mrs. Hastings' actions, our policy won't cover the damages. She's personally liable for all repairs and resident claims." Margaret's face went pale as the implications sank in. The vote to remove her from the board was unanimous. The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, the community began to heal. Our HOA adopted new guidelines promoting sustainable energy solutions. 3 other residents installed solar panels, and the community even started a program to help senior residents maintain their properties. As for Margaret, she put her house on the market 2 weeks later. I heard she's moving to a neighborhood without an HOA, probably for the best. The last time I saw her, she was supervising the moving truck, carefully avoiding eye contact with anyone on the street. My solar panels are still here, working perfectly after being repaired. Sometimes, when the sun hits them just right, I swear they shine a little brighter, as if they know they've won. And every time I get my reduced energy bill, I think about sending Margaret a copy, but I don't need to. Living well, and sustainably is the best revenge. Epilogue: A new beginning. The story of Maple Grove Estates became a cautionary tale for HOAs everywhere. News outlets picked up the story, and it even sparked a national conversation about the balance between community standards and individual rights. Margaret's downfall served as a reminder that power, when misused, can have far-reaching consequences. As for me, I've become something of a local hero. Neighbors stop me on the street to thank me for standing up to Margaret and for pushing the community toward a more sustainable future. It's a strange feeling, but a good one. And so, life in Maple Grove Estates goes on brighter, greener, and more united than ever before. The solar panels on my roof gleam in the sunlight, a symbol of resilience and progress. And as I sit on my porch, sipping my morning coffee, I can't help but feel a sense of pride. We fought the good fight, and we won.